はい、皆さんこんにちは。米国特許セミナーパテントターミノロジーです。このシリーズでは特許用語、表現などをできるだけわかりやすく解説しています。講師は米国特許弁護士であるブライアン・エプスタインさんです。今回はインファレンシャルクレーミングの戦略的活用法について見ていきたいと思います。インファレンシャルクレーミングというのは、クレームの構成要素として、明確に記載すべきものを明確に記載しないといった一般的に不適切なクレーム形式のことを言うんですが、これをあえて戦略的に使う方法があるという、非常に興味深いお話をしていただきます。では早速お聞きします。Okay, Brian-san, please share your thoughts on inferential claiming.
Certainly. So let's begin by discussing what is inferential claiming. So as we discussed in session 13, U.S. claims typically follow an element-by-element structure. And so the claims generally recite their elements explicitly, right? They'll be listed in different subparagraphs. But what about an element that is not explicitly recited? In that case, we say that these elements are inferentially claimed. And so maybe the best way to do this is by showing an example. So at the top of this slide, there is an example of inferential claiming. And this comes from Oshima-san's blog post about inferential claiming. In this example, devices A and B, as well as the first and second attachments, are explicitly recited as being included in the apparatus X. In contrast, well, let's read the claim. So it says an apparatus X comprising a device A, a device B, a first attachment which is disposed on the device B and to which one end of a tool Z is attachable to restrict displacement of the device A, and a second attachment which is disposed at a predetermined distance from the first attachment and to which another end of the tool Z is attachable. And so, as I said, devices A and B, as well as the first and second attachments, are explicitly recited as elements of this apparatus X. In contrast, tool Z, as well as its one end and its another end, are inferentially claimed. They're shown in yellow text, or in the yellow highlighting here. And so the question is, does apparatus X include the tool Z?
はい、ここまではですね、インファレンシャルクレーミングの基本について解説いただきました。具体的なクレーム例があったんですが、その中では、道具 Z がインファレンシャルクレーミングの例でした。米国特許クレームの基本は、エレメントバイエレメントという形式なんですが、道具 Z がそのような形式になっていないということでした。このような記載方法をインファレンシャルクレーミングということでした。はい、では次に行きたいと思います。Ryan さん、next slide, please.
Sure. So what is the significance of this inferential claiming? Well, under the broadest reasonable interpretation standard applied during U.S. prosecution, the examiner does not need to give patentable weight to inferentially claimed elements. Okay? The examiners are correct to not give these recitations weight. However, some examiners will give them weight. So, this isn't a rule that they can never give it weight. It's an interpretation that examiners sometimes adopt and are completely reasonable in adopting in particular cases. On the other hand, during enforcement, the accused infringer will argue whether or not the inferred element is present, right? for example, maybe the accused infringer's apparatus X does not include tool Z, right? So in this case, they do not infringe. Well, let me read the rest of the slide. Sorry. So the accused infringer will argue whether the inferred element is present. So maybe the accused infringer wants the inferred element present to avoid infringement. Okay. So, for example, maybe the accused infringer's apparatus X does not include the tool Z. In that case, they do not infringe if the claim includes tool Z, right? And so that's why they want this inferred element present, is to avoid infringement. On the other hand, maybe the accused infringer wants the inferred element omitted to invalidate the patent based on prior art. So in this case, the prior art might not include tool Z. Maybe that's the novel feature. Maybe that's the inventive feature to this application and its claims. Therefore, it is easier to invalidate the patent based on the existing prior art if tool Z is not present. Of course, the accused infringer eventually must choose one position as to whether the element is present or not, right? They can't play both sides. They will have to choose, but they don't need to choose now, right? That's sometime down the road. And you can see how during prosecution, the examiner will might try to insist that the element is omitted. But when it gets to infringement, your infringer will, what's the word? Opportunistically decide whether or not they want that element present or not.
はい、ここではですね、まず、プロセキューション、審査においては、インファレンシャルクレーミングには特許的ウェイトが与えられないというのが一般的であるということでした。そして権利行使においては、新会社の製品に道具 Z が含まれていない場合は、新会社は特許権者のクレームに道具 Z が含まれていることを望むだろうと思われます。これで侵害回避を狙うだろうということでした。一方、新会社が先行技術に基づいて、特許権者のクレームを無効化したい場合で、先行技術に道具 Z が含まれていない場合は、特許権者のクレームにも道具 Z が含まれていない方が無効化しやすいということでした。はい、では次に行きたいと思います。Brian さん、next slide, please.
Sure. So this kind of begs the question, is inferential claiming bad? It's just a tool. So inferential claiming is bad if it is used unintentionally by, the Ben Rishi or by the U.S. patent attorney. However, inferential claiming can also be used deliberately to strategic effect. All right, sounds great. What does that look like? So during prosecution, it can satisfy an examiner who requires that a claim recite a particular element, especially during an interview. Maybe we're conducting an interview and the examiner says, that he believes that the inventive feature is this one element, and he really wants us to include it in the claims, and we disagree for whatever reason. Maybe the examiner's wrong. Maybe the examiner's correct, but we don't want to include that because this is a targeted prosecution. Maybe we just don't want to limit the scope, whatever it is. This is an opportunity to include the element to make the examiner happy, but also a way to kind of back off from explicitly reciting this element and therefore, committing to having the element be present in our claims. In addition, the USPTO sometimes prohibits amendments from broadening the claims, right? We've got a couple of examples here. AFCP 2.0 program, during reissue, during re-examination. And so, to potentially broaden the claims, we can attempt to change the explicit elements to inferential elements. Of course, post-grant examiners will consider whether these amendments do improperly broaden the claim, right? They're on the lookout for this sort of thing. They might not enter it, particularly in something more like a re-examination. But it's still a strategy to be considered because the value of the patent might depend on the particular elements, right? If we're in re-examination, it's probably because we're in the middle of enforcing this patent, and maybe that is the entire value of the patent is this one, getting this one element to be recited inferentially as opposed to explicitly, right? We need to reduce the impact of this element so that we can continue to enforce the patent against our accused infringer.
はい、ここでは、いよいよインファレンシャルクレーミングを戦略的に使う方法について紹介いただきました。具体的にはですね、もともと明確に記載された構成要素を補正でインファレンシャルクレーミングに書き直すことによって、実質的にクレームを拡大することができるということでした。これはクレームを拡大できない補正の場合に有用であるということでした。はい。では次に行きたいと思います。Okay, Brian さん、next slide, please.
All right, so what can practitioners do? So the most important thing is they can understand when the examiner is not giving patentable weight to inferential elements, right? This is, we can't always do it. We don't always have an opportunity to do it during an interview. Sometimes we only have an office action to look at, and the examiner is applying some strange piece of prior art, and we don't understand why. And the reason is that there's an inferential element that we think should be there that the examiner doesn't. And so that's what I mean is, the examiner's not giving it patentable weight because the element is not explicitly recited. Again, the examiner is reasonable to do so. And so we need to know when to amend to positively recite the elements, because that's enough to overcome the art a lot of the time. We'll also want to consider opportunities where inferential claiming might be beneficial. Again, something like the AFCP program might present an opportunity where, the applicant says, we don't want to file another RCE. We need to get this amendment entered now, but we want to reduce, if we were filing an RCE, we could completely eliminate the element. But because we only have this much budget left, let's just do an AFCP, and we're going to inferentially claim this element now as opposed to explicitly reciting it. Patent law isn't practiced at a university or in an ivory tower. It's practiced in the real world where people have, budget restrictions and, deadlines and stuff. All right. So what can translators do? Typically, translators should not make a decision about inferential claiming. Follow the source text. However, a translator can offer an alternative translation in which inferentially claimed elements are explicitly recited. Right? You can go to the applicant and say, look, you've got this inferential claiming here, and so here's, a translation of the source text, but I've also prepared this additional translation in which these elements are explicitly recited. You can choose which one you'd like us to follow. The only caveat, of course, is as always, be mindful of PCT applications. The original translation of a PCT application should be the source text. And so maybe this alternative translation, in that case, becomes something for a preliminary amendment.
はい、最後は、実務家と翻訳者へのアドバイスでした。実務家へのアドバイスは、インファレンシャルクレーミングが役立つタイミングを、よく見ておくということでした。翻訳者へのアドバイスは、インファレンシャルクレーミングの問題は、翻訳者が判断できる問題ではないことが多いため、翻訳者の対応としては、原文通りに翻訳して、その上でインファレンシャルクレーミングを解消した代替案などを提示することが考えられるということでした。はい、今回はこれで以上になります。ご質問や扱ってほしいトピックなどがありましたら、YouTube のコメント欄に書いていただくか、スライド最後に記載のメールアドレスまでお気軽にご連絡ください。では本日もありがとうございました。失礼します。
ありがとうございました。Oh, we have a correction from one of our comments. Thank you.